Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are doing a tier list of all of the new commanders from March of the Machine, the Aftermath. Now, this is a very small set. It's only 50 cards, and I think 21 of those new cards are commanders, which is absolutely crazy. But we are going to be going over all of those today. Two disclaimers before we start. Number one, I did a top 10 video of just all of the cards from the set back on Wednesday. So if you haven't seen that video, you might want to go watch that before you watch this, because any of the commanders I talked about in that top 10, I'm not going to spend as much time talking about them today. Second disclaimer, here's how I'm going to be doing my tier list. S means I am for sure going to try building a deck around this. A is I could see myself building a commander deck around this, not sure, but it's at least going to go somewhere in a deck that I already have. B is kind of cool, but I don't know if I'd play it. C is I'm not interested in it really at all. And then D is I think it's kind of poop, or it's not a good commander, or somewhere in there. Or C could be like maybe it's decent in some decks, but it's definitely not a good commander. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get started. First up, we have Arnie Metalbrow for 2 and a red, Human Berserker 3/3. Whenever a creature you control attacks or a creature enters the battlefield under your control attacking, you may pay 1 and a red. If you do, you may put a creature card with mana value less than that creature's mana value from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. This seems like a pretty fun, aggressive red kind of deck. So I think the best way to build it would be ramp a lot early game to get your bigger threats out early. And then with Arnie, you can use that mana to then cheat in some smaller creatures, which I guess you also don't necessarily have to be playing like these huge, giant, threatening creatures either. You could just be playing stuff that's either evasive or has immediate value, whether it's an attack trigger or an ETB or something like that. So this actually seems pretty cool. I'm going to go ahead and put this in B. I don't necessarily know if I would play it, but I definitely see the value in it. I definitely think it's a fun idea. Next, we have Calyx, Guided by Fate. For 1 green white, it's a 2/2 human druid enchantment creature. When it or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter on a target creature. And then when it or an enchanted creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may create a token that's a copy of a non-legendary enchantment you control. Do this only once each turn. So this is like a more aggressive enchantment kind of deck, which is kind of a cool idea. I think like Sithis, especially if you're looking at enchantments in only these 2 colors, Sithis is kind of your go-to option. And that is a really boring deck to play against because it kind of just plays all the enchantress effects to where, you know, play an enchantment, draw a card, and you just do that over and over again, and it takes forever to find a win con. Again, the problem is there's no way it's as good as Sithis, so I think it has that working against it. We're going to go ahead and put him in B as well, though, just because it's a cool idea to try to push enchantments in a more aggressive direction, but I don't think it's going to beat out a lot of the other already existing enchantress decks. Next up, we have Danitha, New Benalia's Light, 1 green white, human knight, 2/2 with vigilance, trample, and lifelink. Once during each of your turns, you may cast an aura or equipment spell from your graveyard. The equipment part of it, I'm not that interested in, but the aura part of that is pretty cool because a lot of auras, if you get rid of the creature that the auras are attached to, they go away, you lost that value, boohoo, sucks to be you. But if you have just stapled onto your commander an easy way to get back those auras, that's pretty good. I was going to say that I'm not necessarily interested in playing Danitha as a commander because I think this would obviously be maybe some kind of Voltron kind of build, or an auras matter, equipment kind of matters kind of deck, and those tend to be kind of Voltron builds. And I was going to say as a 2/2 for 3, not very good, but I guess she does have vigilance, trample, and lifelink, and those are all very relative keywords that a lot of the times when you're building those kind of decks, you're going to be playing equipments or auras that are giving those keywords because they're just really useful. So the fact that, well, now you can try playing with different auras or different equipments, that actually sounds really cool. And I also, I really like playing Voltron decks, and especially assuming that we can get the ball rolling on our Magic Online series going pretty quick, maybe I'd play this. So I'll go ahead and put this in A. It seems pretty good. And also I think it's quite playable if you already have an aura deck that is in these colors. I think this is all probably going to go in those decks as well, just because it gives you an option to get those auras back pretty easily. Okay, next up we have Jarina, Dauntless General. I'm not going to spend much time talking about her because I talked about her in the top 10 video, but overall I actually do like this as a 2-mana way to keep graveyards in check, and also if you are playing Human Tribal, it's going to give a pretty efficient way to protect your board, and it's quite flexible, especially since you can do it at instant speed at any time. Leave it up in case there's a board wipe on the way, or if your opponent blocked in a way that you weren't expecting, is kind of a way to keep your board safe. So I want to put this as an A as well. Not necessarily interested in building it as a commander, but it is going to go in my already existing humans deck, which I played on the newest episode of Upkeep. So if you haven't seen that game, you should go check that out. It was a fun time. Next up, we have Joriel, Voice of Zhalfir for 2 green, blue, 3/3 human druid. At the beginning of combat on your turn, up to 1 target land you control becomes an XX green and blue bird creature with flying and haste until end of turn, where X is the number of cards in your hand. It's still a land. Whenever a land creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. I actually like this quite a bit. The newest Tatiova that was from Dominaria United also kind of encourages you to go lands that turn into creatures, and I thought that was like kind of a good idea, but that Tatiova didn't seem all that strong, but Joriel seems pretty dang cool. I think you're going to be able to keep the ball rolling on that pretty easily, just because giving those lands flying means you're going to be able to get in for combat damage pretty easily, at least a lot of the times. So you're going to be able to keep drawing cards and keep finding ways. So I think you're just, kind of playing a bunch of lands, turning them into creatures. It sounds like a pretty good time, and you're in blue, so you can take extra turns as well and get that multiple times. So that seems pretty dang strong. I'm going to put that in A. I see a world where I might build that. I don't have a Simic deck currently. It seems like a fun option. Next up, we have Karn Legacy Reforged, 5 mana Golem, power and toughness equal to the greatest mana value among artifacts you control. At the beginning of your upkeep, add colorless for each artifact you control. This mana can't be spent to cast non-artifact spells. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. This is another one I've already talked about a little bit, but if you're going to use him as a commander, probably just play big stuff artifacts. Find a way to close out the game with big artifact creatures, or there's a lot of big artifacts that just have really game-breaking effects. So he's probably a pretty good commander, but he's also going to just go in a lot of artifact decks, or artifact-heavy decks, I should say. I'm probably going to play him in Osgir. I'm probably going to play him in Kozilek. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and put that in A. It probably is a pretty cool commander, but I'm mostly just excited to be playing in some decks I already have. Next up, we have Kiora, Sovereign of the Deep for 3 green blue. It's a 4/5 Merfolk Noble with Vigilance and Ward 3. Whenever you cast a Kraken, Leviathan, Octopus, or Serpent spell from your hand, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is that spell's mana value, which is probably going to be a big number. You may cast a spell with mana value less than X from among them without paying its mana cost. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. That actually kind of reminds me a little bit of Rashmi from Kaladesh, which I just think is a sweet card that I wish I had an excuse to play more often. But I think if you're going to play Sea Creature Tribal, this is finally probably your best option. We've seen other attempts to try to make a good Sea Creature commander before, but this just seems like by far the best option. So we're going to go ahead and probably put that in B. I have no interest in building that deck, but I'm glad that for the people who want to build it, they got it. So that's definition of B right there. Next up, we have Nahiri, Forged in Fury for 4 red, white, 5/4 Core Artificer, affinity for equipment, so it costs 1 less to cast for each equipment you control, and whenever an equipped creature you control attacks, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. You may cast equipment spells this way without paying their mana cost. I think if you're going to play an equipments deck, whether it's a Voltron or, going wide. There's a couple different ways to do equipments nowadays. This is probably, especially if you're wanting to be in these 2 colors, which, that's, kind of normally what the color combination is for equipment matters. But I think this is maybe your new best option, just because she's probably going to come down relatively quick, especially if you're playing a bunch of cheap equipments that are, in the 1 to 3 mana range. She's probably going to come down pretty early and then start giving you immediate card advantage, which is something that this color combination tends to be at least somewhat lacking in. So this actually seems pretty dang sweet. I've never built a equipment deck, and I've never really had the desire to, just because they tend to be kind of slow, kind of clunky, and aggression is not always my forte, but I actually really do like the new Nahiri. I'm going to go ahead and put that in A. I see a world where I might build that. Next up, we have Narset Enlightened Exile for 1 blue, red, white, human monk. That's a 3/4. Creatures you control have prowess, so whenever you cast a non-creature spell, they get +1/+1. And whenever Narset Enlightened Exile attacks, exile target non-creature, non-land card with mana value less than Narset's power from a graveyard and copy it. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. So I think the ceiling on Narset is incredibly high. We've seen the other Narsets. They all tend to be really good. The part about this that's a little awkward is that you have to play this weird balance of, you have to play a lot of creatures in order to giving them prowess matter, but you also want to make sure you're filling up your own graveyard with a lot of other instants and sorceries, because you can't necessarily rely on your opponents to be doing that. I mean, surely if you have 3 opponents, surely one of them has at least a couple targets, but you can't rely on that, so you need to be doing that yourself. So I think the smart way to do that would be play a bunch of instants and sorceries that are making tokens, token creatures that is, so then you're triggering the prowess, but you're also building up your board. That's probably the best way to do this. And the problem with that is that a lot of those creatures that tend to be on the smaller side, like they might only be like 1/1s or 2/2s to start off with, which if you get to chain together with prowess, that can obviously get out of control. I'm just having a really hard time evaluating this card. I think it's really cool, but I think it might be a trap. I think it might be harder to build than it looks. I'm going to go ahead and put it in B. I might want to see it in action before I ever consider playing it myself. Okay, next up we have Nashi Moon's Legacy for black, green, blue. Rat Shaman, that's a 3/4 with Menace and Ward 1. Whenever Nashi attacks, exile up to 1 target legendary or rat card from your graveyard and copy it. You may cast the copy. I see a lot of people joking around about building Sultai rats out of this, which there's not much payoff in doing so. I mean, almost all rat stuff is just in black, though you obviously do get a lot of great cards if you add in blue and green. Both of those colors have a lot of good tribal support cards, you know, the Kindred cards like Kindred Discovery, Kindred Summons, and then you're going to be able to ramp better with green, and blue's going to give you better card draw, all that. So if you wanted to build rat tribal in this color combination, it's not that you couldn't do that, but it's like why would you do that instead of just playing mono black? I don't know. But I think if you're just thinking of it as a Sultai legendary matters commander, that actually seems really, really cool. And I think it's going to go in the 99 of maybe like Joda, maybe like Sisay, decks like that is probably going to go in there. And then I think if you, again, want to just play legendary matters in this color combination, that actually probably is a pretty decent way to do it. I don't think the power level on it is really all that high though, because Nashi has to attack, and then you can only cast the things from your graveyard, which means you probably want to make sure that it's later in the game or you're milling or something like that in order to put things in there, and then it's not reducing the cost or anything. So I don't actually think it's that good, but I think as a utility piece in already existing decks, probably pretty good. I'll go ahead and put it in B because I know someone's going to enjoy making a Sultai rat deck, but I don't necessarily think that that's a good choice. Next up we have Nissa Resurgent Animist. This is for 2 and a green, Elf Scout, 3/3 with landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, add 1 mana of any color. Then if this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal an elf or elemental card. Put that card into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So this is kind of, I mean, it's 1 more mana, but it's kind of like Lotus Cobra on steroids. And being in mono green, I think limits it a lot, but I think as a piece in the 99, I think this is probably actually a really good card. You're probably going to be able to run this in Elf Tribal, obviously, and Elemental Tribal. And if you wanted to build a commander around it, I mean, it's probably good. And then maybe, you're already, like, the average green deck probably has a couple elementals or a couple elves lying in the deck already, just as utility creatures, like disregarding the tribal payoffs. So I see a world where even outside of Elf Tribal or outside of Elemental Tribal, you might still try running this. I think I want to actually put Nissa in C. I know a lot of people are excited about her, but I'm particularly not. It's just Lotus Cobra with card advantage. But so as a commander, not excited, but as a utility piece in certain decks, I think it's going to be really good. Again, Elf Tribal, Elemental Tribal, or if you're just have a green deck that has more than a couple targets for those, I think it's going to be really good. And obviously hitting that second landfall isn't really that hard when you're playing green and you're playing Rampant Growth and Cultivates and all that stuff. Okay, next up we have Niv Mizzet Supreme. This is the Taco Bell menu item for Wooburg. It's a 5/5 dragon avatar with flying hexproof from monocolored. Each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard that's exactly 2 colors has jumpstart. So there's a couple decks that this is going to slot into. So I have a charm deck that's built around Ramos, the dragon engine. I would have to double check how many of those instants and sorceries are exactly 2 colors, but there's a chance I just run this in there for value to get those back. The Niv Mizzet Reborn deck that exists, this probably goes in there. And I think if you wanted to probably build a new deck around this, it's actually probably pretty strong. I will say that Jumpstart is a little bit of an extra hoop than you would think, but again, if you're playing some kind of spell slinger thing, you're probably going to find a way to refill your hand pretty quickly, in which case you're going to find cards that you're not going to feel bad about letting go. So I actually think this is pretty cool. We'll go ahead and put it in A because I think it has a couple homes that already exist. Oh, I guess even in dragon decks, like if you're playing a 5-color dragons deck, there are just going to be utility instant and sorcery spells, whether that's removal or ramp, that you're not going to like be upset about if you get another opportunity to cast that. So next up we have Obnixilus Captive Kingpin for 2 black-red, 4/3 demon with flying and trample, and whenever one or more opponents each lose exactly 1 life, put a 1/1 counter on him, and then exile the top card of your library. Until your next turn, you may play that card. So I'm gonna, this is another card I've already talked about, so I'm gonna just go ahead and say it's an A. I think it goes infinite with All Will Be One, and so I'll probably play it in standard, but it's also gonna, I think, be a really cool deck if you want to build around it, and it has plenty of homes that already are going to exist. Specifically, I'm going to put it in my Prosper deck. I think it's really, really sick. Thumbs up for this one. Next up, we have Pianalar, Console of Revival for red-white, 2/3 Human Artificer. Thopters you control have haste, and whenever you play a land from exile or cast a spell from exile, create a 1/1 Thopter token. I really like this card. I wish it had existed a few months ago when we did the budget episode of our Commander gameplay series, Upkeep. I played a 4-color Thopter tribal deck, and it was really just a meme. Maybe if I had paired down to 2 colors and just played this as the commander, maybe the deck would have played better. I don't know. At the very least, this would have been a really, really good option to at least consider running in there. I think it's pretty cool, pretty fun. And if you wanted to build a real Thopter deck that wasn't what I built, this is probably pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and put it in B. I don't have any desire to play it, but it's going to make some people really happy. And if anyone ever wanted to make better additions to my Thopter deck, that would be a way to do it. Okay, next up we have Plarg and Nasiri. This is 3 red, 5/4 Orc Efreet. Sure. And I hate this card because it just like, everything else from Strixhaven is just too many words. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card. An opponent chooses a non-land card exiled this way. You may cast up to 2 spells from among the other cards exiled this way without paying their mana cost. So it's a slightly wordier, slightly less good version of Atali. In theory, I really like these kind of cards that let you play cards off of your opponent's decks. I think that effect is really fun, but for some reason, the wording on this, and maybe it's just that, I don't like some of these characters. Maybe there's a little bit of bias there, but I'm going to go ahead and put this in C. I think if you're really wanting to build a commander deck that is about playing cards off of your opponent's decks, there are just better commanders. Though I would say that this is probably a good include in the 99 in those decks if you are playing that. Okay, next up we have Rocco Street Chef for red, green, white. It's a 2/4 elf druid. At the beginning of your end step, each player exiles the top card of their library until your next end step. Each player may play the card exiled this way, and whenever a player plays a land from exile or cast a spell from exile, you put a 1/1 counter on target creature and create a food token. So I think the way to think about this is it's kind of group hug, but it's always going to benefit you a little bit more because you're also getting that extra card deeper as well as your opponents. And then if they do end up playing one of those cards from exile, you get some kind of benefit. Now, I don't think that food tokens are inherently very good. I think there's ways to abuse food tokens, but food tokens by themselves aren't very good. But if you are playing a +1/+1 counters kind of deck, I think that is going to accumulate a lot of value. I don't necessarily think that Rocco is going to be a good commander, but I think he is going to be good in certain decks. He could be good in group hug, but I think if you're just playing like a +1/+1 counters kind of deck in these colors, I think he's at least a option because I think it's a decent way to trick your opponents into giving you more value. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in B because it's maybe a fun commander. I don't know, but it's at least good in certain decks. Okay, next up we have Samut, Vizier of Nakantum. Sure. And then for 1 red, green, it's a 2/3 human warrior cleric with first strike, vigilance, and haste. And whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, if that creature enters the battlefield this turn, draw a card. I don't think this is the first haste matters kind of creature that we've seen. I mean, obviously the first version of Samut, this goes great in that deck. And then there was also, I think, the Jund one from Streets of New Capenna. So this isn't the first time we've seen something like this, but the fact that this one has card advantage on it, it's only 3 mana. It's going to come down really quick. She counts herself. So if she deals combat damage to a player on that first turn you cast her, you get to draw a card. And especially if you're getting down her down on, turn 2, turn 3, that is quite likely. So I think it's pretty strong. I don't necessarily want to play this, but I definitely see that it's going to have plenty of homes, and it's probably a decent commander, so we'll go ahead and put that in B. Sarkhan Soul of Flame for 1 blue-red, 2/4 human shaman dragon spells cost 1 less to cast, and whenever that you cast, and then whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under your control, you may have Sarkhan become a copy of it until end of turn, except its name is Sarkhan and it's not legendary. Again, this is a card I've talked about before. I think it's sick. I think if you're playing Izzet Dragons, this is your best commander, and it's also going to go in the 99 of a lot of already existing dragon decks, probably all of them that fit this color combination. So we're going to go ahead and put that in A. I like it a lot. Next up is Sigarda, Font of Blessings for 2 green white. It's a 4/4 angel with flying. Other permanents you control have hexproof, and you may look at the top card of your library at any time and cast Angels and Humans from the top. Another card I've already talked about, but this is, Angels and Humans put together. If you want to build a human angel tribal deck, not many reasons you would want to do that, but you could if you wanted to. I like having that option. And then I think as an angel commander, this is, if you want to play this color combination, this is probably your best option. And then I think it's also going to go in the 99 of a lot of other humans decks, as well as any other angel decks that might be able to play her even outside of the commander option. It's card advantage. It comes down early. It protects your board. It's really, really sweet. I like this card a lot. We're going to go ahead and put that in A. Next up, we have Tazri, Stalwart Survivor for 2 and a white. It's a 3/3 human warrior. Each creature you control has tap to add 1 mana of any of this creature's colors. Spend this mana only to activate an ability of a creature. Activate only if this creature has another activate ability. And then for Wooburg, you can tap it, mill 5 cards, put all creature cards with activate abilities that aren't mana abilities from among the milled cards into your hand. The obvious way that I would probably think about, consider running this, is like Magus Tribal. I think that would be hilarious. I have a Magus Tribal deck that I built for an upcoming episode of our Commander Online series. I might want to switch out Kenrith for Tazri as the commander. That seems pretty decent. Overall, I don't think it's very good, though. We're going to go ahead and put that in B. I see where it could be really good, but I think all of the Tazris are at least kind of clunky, except for the first one. The first one was what? Allies Matters? That one was pretty good. All right, last one is Tyvar, the Bellicose for 2 black-green. It's a 5/4. Whenever 1 or more elves you control attacks, they gain Death Touch until end of turn. And each creature you control has, whenever a mana ability of this creature resolves, put a +1/+1 counter on it equal to the amount of mana this creature produced. This ability triggers only once each turn. Now, the other black-green elf deck that everyone knows, Lathril, I don't know if Tyvar is better than Lathril, but I at least think it probably leads to more interesting games because it encourages you to be aggressive. So in that sense, I like Tyvar a lot more than Lathril, even though I don't necessarily know if he's better. And even then, you're probably going to put Tyvar in the 99 of that deck, even if you don't switch him out as the new commander. So if you're wanting to play elves, cool. If not, whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and put this as B, I think. But overall, yeah, pretty decent. Okay, so that's going to be my tier list. So none of these are ones that I'm for sure going to build a new deck around, but quite a few cards in here that I'm excited to play around, and cards in here that I'm excited that exist for the people who want them. I definitely know that there's homes for a lot of these cards. I think it's crazy that just right now we talked about, basically half the set. It's a very small set, and it's crazy that so many of them are creatures. I think it's a really interesting thing to try to see how these mini sets could affect Standard, affect Commander, affect the culture of Magic in general. I think it's an interesting thing to try. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But let me know down in the comments if any of these are S tiers for you. Are any of these cards that you are for sure going to build a new deck around? I'd love to know, so drop a comment, and then make sure you like this video and hit subscribe, and we'll be back for more content later.